Israel is at war, and in the early part of the day on say Shabbat, when everybody was resting and spending their time with the Sabbath. This was right after Sukkot. The tabernacles has wrapped up. They have they have been attacked by Hamas coming out of Gaza. And with us today is a dear friend of Charisma, a dear friend of mine, Jonathan Feldstein, who's in Israel right now, in within range of these missiles. And so, Jonathan, it's great to be able to talk to you. I'm glad you're doing okay. I just was able to listen to you talk in a kind of a live webinar with some of your friends about what's going on. And so I'm grateful that you're able to share with us what is happening right there, because in America, we're limited. Could you please tell us tell us what's going on, and most importantly, how we can be praying and help?
Yeah, thank you, John. First of all, always a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be part of the Charisma family as the only Orthodox Jewish podcast host on Charisma Podcast Network. We actually have a program coming out about this on the podcast is called Inspiration from Zion. Saturday morning at about 6:20 Israel time, Hamas, the Islamic terrorist group that controls Gaza, launched an unprecedented surprise attack on Israel, breaching the border fence at the same time as they were launching thousands of rockets. 3,000 is what I heard in the first little bit of the battle. What you see behind me is just an illustration of how the rockets are shot from this side and from Gaza, and the Iron Dome picks them up and turns them around. We didn't know about that because it was Shabbat, the Sabbath. We were offline, didn't know anything that was going on. Came home at 1:00 in the morning from my daughter's house for having a lovely family dinner together, and was peacefully asleep in bed when the air raid siren that's about 50 yards behind my bedroom window went off blaring. And if some people don't wake up from their alarm clocks. This is something that you do not sleep through. We grabbed our stuff, and my wife and I ran downstairs to our bomb shelter. It's standard Israeli construction to have a bomb shelter in your house. So we had 2 of our 6 kids home, and the 4 of us sat for several minutes until we heard explosions. But what was very surreal is that everyone knows this, sort of in between being awake and asleep, where you're just lying there and not completely aware of what's going on, but not completely asleep either. I perceived that there were these booms that sounded to me almost as if I was dreaming, that there were tanks firing, and it made no sense. I couldn't think why I was hearing these noises. I wasn't asleep and dreaming, but I didn't think it was real, and I paid no attention to it. And then moments later, we realized when we were scurrying down to the bomb shelter that the booms we heard were the Iron Dome knocking out rockets that had been fired about 40 or maybe 45 miles from the Gaza Strip to where we live in the Judean mountains just south of Jerusalem. The Iron Dome is super sophisticated, and I'm happy to share more information about that. But it only triggers a siren in an area that it perceives the trajectory of the rocket is actually going to land, and it will only trigger a siren in a populated area. So if it was landing on the hill in front of me, in front of my house, half a mile, then it wouldn't have triggered the siren at all. We would just woken up to a huge explosion in the valley, and that's happened to us before years ago. So because it was Shabbat, we were offline. We didn't have our computers on. We didn't have our phones on, no TV. The general rule in observing the traditions of Shabbat is that if it's not life-threatening, you're not using technology. You completely unplug. And so we didn't even have lights on in our bomb shelter because no one thought at 1:00 in the morning we'd be going into the bomb shelter. And the bomb shelter is completely sealed.
Sure.
For the next couple of hours, we scurried into the bomb shelter 4 times. We every time we came out, we would hear air raid sirens in different parts of the region, maybe going all the way up to Jerusalem, which is only 12, 13 kilometers from where we live,
Mm.
to adjacent communities. And we heard these muffled booms, but nothing as loud as what happened overhead. We didn't know what was going on. We didn't leave the house. Our synagogue is right behind, and I was running late that day. And so I looked out the window and I saw everyone walking home, some people scurrying home. And because it's not safe to gather people, basically no one went back to services, even though it was not just Shabbat, but a very festive holiday that we would have all liked to be able to be in the service celebrating together.
Yeah.
We didn't know what was going on until about 4 p.m. when my 25-year-old son, who was just married 3 months ago, came into the house. He's and his wife are living in her parents' house for the time being. And he came in telling us that he was called up. He's a paratrooper, and he was called up. Came to get his uniform and his equipment, and he had a ride in 10 minutes. Now, I'll tell you what, we knew something was going on, but we didn't know. And he told us about this border incursion. He told us that entire Israeli communities had been overrun by terrorists. Still, as we're speaking today, I don't know. I haven't watched the news in the last 2 hours because of that other webinar, but there may be terrorists camped out in some of these Israeli communities. We don't know where they all are. We don't know if we got them all or expelled them all. So Israel right now is living in a time of tremendous danger, tremendous fear. As of 2 hours ago, over 700 people were killed. Now, I want to point that out. We're a country of just under 10 million. It's a huge proportion. If you consider that on 9/11, and 9/11 is a very good analogy, there were not quite 3,000 people who were killed in all of those attacks. In one day here in Israel, so far, 700 bodies have been recovered and identified. And all day today, that number has been going up and up and up and up. And in addition to bodies being found, we're now identifying more and more people who are missing and not dead and assumed held hostage. And now the estimate is there are about 100 Israelis who are being held hostage live in Gaza, from elderly people who don't have their medicines to something horrific that my kids told me they saw online. Jewish Israeli babies carted off in chicken cages, brought into Gaza, held hostage there, and everyone in between. It's horrific. It's horrific. It's inhuman what's going on. And maybe the last thing I'll just say on this, and you direct me in whatever direction you want. This is not a war in the sense of armies going to war against each other. This is a obscene terrorist attack against civilian populations. It is a war crime on every level. It is the direct targeting and the cold-blooded murder of civilians on the street, in their home, in front of their relatives, and what bumped up the death toll today is there had been a concert on Saturday morning, an overnight concert with what must have been hundreds of young Israelis. And today, 240 bodies were found. They were mowed down by machine gun fire, as if the terrorists were playing in a shooting gallery in an arcade. It's disgusting. Families are giving DNA samples so we can identify the dead and try and figure out who else is missing and where they are.
Jonathan, thank you for sharing this. I mean, it's as gruesome as it is. We're seeing all these images showing up on social media, whether it be Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, wherever. People are sharing some of these things, and a lot of it's being blurred out, but you can find the real things, and it's absolutely horrible what is happening, and what has happened so far. Jonathan, we're here in the United States, and there's been pictures in places that are supporters of Palestine, that they're celebrating these things, and that's just it makes me sick to know that these are happening that way. What can we as Americans do here in the United States to help bring clarity and understanding to this situation? Because I mean, from what it looks like, Israel was it was unprovoked, and there was just this militant incursion as a declaration of war, which Israel has every right to defend itself.
Yeah.
But here in the United States, we're removed from it, and we have people that are for it and people that are against it, and us as especially spirit-filled Christians, how can we be a light and a witness and really explain the truth of what's happening?
Well, okay, it's a great question, and it's a complicated answer. First of all, there is no moral equivalency. This is a violation of human rights and war crimes on every level. And yes, Israel will respond, and that's part of the fear. Now, my son-in-law have been called up. I learned just before, I didn't even mention it, I don't think, on the webinar, I just did. My daughter's boyfriend was called up to go to the north because there have been threats from Hezbollah in Lebanon. But there's been a massive call up, and I don't know how many, but intuitively, based on who I know is getting called up, there's a massive call up, and Israel's preparing for an appropriate response. What Americans, we need to pray. We need to pray. I'm always for praying that God will change the hearts of our enemies, but barring that, and God could have done that yesterday, he could have done it last week, he could have done it last year. If he hasn't done that yet, we have not just we have an obligation to go in and defeat our enemies, and that's solidly biblical. This is not a war crime. We need to defeat them. There's really no gray in the black and white of this. And sadly, when Israel's military operation does kick up, and I don't know when, but sooner than later, I'm guessing, there are going to be civilian casualties on the other side. Not because Israel's trying. In fact, the opposite. Israel's very careful about not attacking where civilians are. The problem is the terrorists use civilians as human shields. They have their bunkers under hospitals. They have their bunkers in the middle of highly populated areas, in apartment buildings, and in mosques and schools and United Nations facilities. So we're going to go in and be as strategic as possible. But I'll tell you what, the tone of the country is where we more than being strategic and more than being humane, there needs to be a abject defeat of the terror, and there needs to be a restoration of deterrence, because we've seen numbers dead in 24, 36 hours that far exceed even the first day of the Yom Kippur War, which, except for the War of Independence, which lasted a year and a half, and we lost 6,000 people, the Yom Kippur War, in about 3.5 weeks, there were just shy of 3,000 Israelis killed. We're already over 700, and it's not going to go down. It's not going down from there. So people need to pray. People need to know the facts. People need to be bold and not afraid to stand up against lies, against rhetoric. People need to engage all of their elected officials, from the White House on down to local school councils, where it's intuitive that people are going to try and pass anti-Israel resolutions. No, we are the rightful inheritors of the land of Israel. We are the reborn Jewish state with the sovereignty, that not because of the United Nations, because God gave us that authority. And now they're attacking us again, still, for 75 years. People need to be very clear about that. And while I disagree with a lot of policies of the Biden administration, I will credit President Biden that his statement yesterday was very solid pro-Israel. Could have been more. He should have spoken about the hostages. He should have spoken about consequences and not just empty threats. And hopefully they're not empty. But when casualties start mounting, he's going to get a lot of pressure from the far left flank of his own party to bolt from supporting Israel. And the last thing I'll say about that is that people need to understand that whether there's a direct cause and effect in the recent Biden administration freeing up of $6 billion to the Islamic regime in Iran as hostage, as ransom for
Mm.
hostages that were being held in Iran. $6 billion goes to fund a lot of terrorism. And whether that money actually made it here to Hamas in the last week or two since it was freed up or not, it doesn't matter. It emboldens the terrorists. It says, yes, we can act with impunity, and we're going to get money, and we're going to get you bowing down to us. And that cannot be allowed to happen, not from the United States of America, not from the United States of America under a Democratic president, and not under a Republican president.
Yeah. I just saw some reports that a lot of weapons that were left in Afghanistan after the United States hastily pulled out were it seemed to be used in these recent attacks. And so there's a lot of things, there's a lot of reasons that we could point the fingers. But one of the things that you mentioned in the webinar that I had a chance to observe, you mentioned about Hezbollah really using these people as human shields, but also their soldiers don't wear uniforms. Could you just talk about that and explain that? Because I think that's an important thing that people in the United States need to understand, that the terrorists aren't wearing uniforms.
Correct.
And what that opens up.
So just by way of clarity, in Gaza, we're talking about Hamas. In Lebanon, we're talking about Hezbollah. Hezbollah, by the way, another thing we need to pray for. Hezbollah is estimated to have 150,000 long-range rockets that can hit almost anywhere in Israel, all the way from Lebanon to my house. You were a little surprised that the Hamas from Gaza can hit 45 miles from Gaza to my house. We're many times more that from the Lebanese border. But they're the same animal. They're the same evil, and they're the same Islamists as a result. But yes, they're terrorists, and they don't put on uniforms. And the leaders rile up their people, and they imbue them with hatred. They imbue them with this sick Islamic ideology that we have no place here, that we're occupiers, usurpers, that the Jewish people never had any presence in the land of Israel, so we have no reason to be here. And their raison d'etre, their core reason for existence, is to destroy us. It's not to create a Palestinian state alongside Israel. It's to destroy the state of Israel. It's in their charter. So people need to know that. And when terrorists wear a pair of ratty jeans and a shirt and a keffiyeh covering their face, most of their face, so we can't identify them, that's as close to a uniform as you get. And that requires real precision. It requires real intelligence in many ways. And it's something that will be unpacked and debated here a lot in the coming weeks. What happened yesterday was a significant intelligence and military failure. But right now, we just need to defeat the evil. And doing so against people who look like you and me, wearing a blue polo shirt or a gray button-down shirt and a pair of jeans and sneakers, doesn't make identifying the enemy who are deliberately putting themselves in the midst of a civilian population very, very easy, and makes a higher probability of civilian casualties. But I'll say this: if you look back at previous conflicts with Hamas and Gaza, which is a very densely populated area, Israel's really good, really tactical about going in and taking out the exact terrorists in the right time and in the right place. And maybe last comment, but one of our recent battles in Gaza, not the current one, I saw a video of a pilot calling off a military strike on terrorists who were on their way to commit a terrorist act. And he said in Hebrew, abort, abort, abort. And what I realized is, why did he say abort? There were two children playing in the side of the street near where the terrorists are. And I made the observation that this is probably the only place in the world where people use the word abort to save the life of a child. And that's exactly what happened.
Wow. That is amazing. That, to know that the Israeli military, the IDF, they care about the civilians on the other side. And they're doing everything they can to only go after the terrorists, only go after the Hamas. People that are, I guess it's a Hamas army. They're terrorists, but however you want to describe it, even though they're not wearing uniforms and they look like civilians, there's a tremendous success rate of taking out the bad guys and
Yes.
saving the good guys, or
Yes.
saving the innocents. And that's one of the things that's horrible in war, is that so many innocent people do lose their lives. It's not just the people that have signed up to fight,
Correct.
um, whether legally or illegally. They've signed up. The civilians haven't signed up for anything. They're just there.
Correct.
And as before we hit record to go live here, I was just reminded of the time where Elisha and his servant in Second Kings were surrounded by the enemy army, and I believe it's Gehazi was the servant, and he was afraid. He was deathly afraid of what was going to happen because they were outnumbered. They could see the enemy all around them, and Elisha prayed, God, open his eyes and let him see what I see. And that's when he saw the chariots of fire all the way around them. And the response was, there's more that are with us than are with our enemies.
Yeah.
And that's something that we need to keep in mind, is that God is for Israel. God is for his chosen people. That is not just a moniker that somebody created. That's not just their slogan. This is something that we go to the Bible and we see from when God first called Abraham his friend, that this is his chosen people. And we as spirit-filled believers need to be praying and interceding for our brothers and sisters in Israel, like Jonathan and his family. And Jonathan's he's got family members that are affected by this. They're going into the military. They're being called up. That you said earlier in your webinar that you don't know of anybody that isn't affected by this, that doesn't know somebody that's been killed or kidnapped or something of that nature. Um, what are some other things that
Excuse
we
me,
need?
John. There was
Yes, sir.
just an explosion out the window behind me.
Okay. So I
No,
should
it's
probably,
okay. We're good. Until the siren goes off, I'm good.
but there's just an explosion outside of your window. So I
Just
just want to
outside,
encourage.
Iron Dome just took out something behind me.
Well, I want to make sure that you're safe and able to get to the bunker and whenever you need to. So if you need to just get up and go,
You'll know.
I'll know. But Jonathan, I want to just kind of give you the opportunity to talk about what you're doing and what we're able to do to join with you to help.
Yeah. So look, first of all, friends, prayer. Prayer is free. You can do it anywhere in any language at any time of day. We need you to pray for our soldiers, my son and my son-in-law, and my neighbors, men up to 40 years old who have been called up and who honestly have no business. I know friends of mine who have been called up right now. They have no business going into combat right now. They're not in much better shape than I am, and I'd be afraid for that. We need to pray for the families of the victims, those victims who are dead. Those I mentioned 700 killed, but also over 2,200 injured, and an estimated 100 who have been kidnapped. There's a lot of families. We're talking about tens of thousands of people who are impacted directly just from that. And Israel in a whole, where people have been asking me, "How are you?" And I've been saying, honestly, I'm angry and I'm scared and I'm nervous and I don't know what's going to be coming. So we need please pray for all of us. And I would encourage all of you to consider donating, consider making a donation. We at the Genesis 123 Foundation build bridges between Jews and Christians with Israel. We do so with tremendous integrity and respect for your funds. And I've been telling people, I don't know where the money is going to go yet, but we support civilian needs for soldiers and civilian security in the communities that have been overrun by terrorists and orphans and at-risk youth. And I had a note in front. I don't want to leave some important ones out. Terror victims and the trauma that's being inflicted. I realized during our previous webinar that only today is exactly 6 months since our neighbors were killed in a horrific terror attack in the Jordan Valley with a mother and her 2 daughters who were gunned down and executed in point blank range. So it's creating trauma for all of us, even if we're 40 or 45 miles from Gaza and we're hearing an occasional boom and getting sent to the bomb shelter. So please consider donating either at John's put up the website genesis123.co, or there's a specific page, love.genesis123.co, where you can not only donate but also send your prayers, send your words of encouragement. And when you do that, I promise you that we're going to put that money to where we can use it the best, and I'm going to communicate that with you once I know where we can really make a big difference. But pray for us. Don't let Israel's enemies take control of the dialogue. This is black and white. There is no gray here. There's no equivocating. Your elected leaders need to know that. Your pastors need to know that. Your next door neighbor. Yeah, just please pray for us.
Yeah, and I want to and I just want to encourage everybody, go to Jonathan's website, genesis123.co, for looking for ways to help, and there'll be more opportunities to do that throughout this conflict. But Jonathan, I would love to stay in touch with you the best way that we can. You know how to reach out to me. I'll reach out to you as well.
Anytime.
We need to stay in touch, and we will be covering you and your family and friends with prayer for sure. And I want to encourage everybody that's watching this and share this online. I'm actually looking at a lot of the comments that are happening as we're doing this right now, and just seeing that there's a lot of people that are saying that they can't share these videos in certain places, Canada being one. And because of what we're talking about, there's people that are there's bans and people can't share things. And so if you can find a way to share this message. And also, whenever you see people saying things that are probably out of ignorance on social media, speak up in defense for Israel. Speak up in defense for Israel. And the Bible tells us that we need to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. And that is something that we will continue to do. And so, Jonathan, I want you to be safe, my brother. Shalom, peace be with you. And thank you for taking the time out of your chaotic world right now to be able to talk with us on Charisma News. Thank you, brother.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. God bless you.
Absolutely.